Okay, hello and welcome back everyone to Grockit's OGTV. This is the GMAT edition where we're going through the official guide to the test, question by question, from one cover of the book to the other in order. We're going from the lower numbered pages to the higher numbered pages, in case that was at all ambiguous. You probably could have assumed that though. Last time we left off, I was on the wrong page. Last time we left off with question number 55. So we are going to go from question number 55 to number 65 today in the sentence correction section. So we're in the final section of the questions we're going to be going over, and you will need to have a copy of the book in front of you. I'll read the question to you, and we will go from there. I'll go through the answer choices and identifying some of the errors. Well, first, of course, I'll make a prediction about what sorts of errors I would expect and that you might train yourself to expect when you read the question as written. Prediction speeds the process of identifying both incorrect answers and correct answers, so it's well worth your while to just take that extra 2-3 seconds at most to make that prediction. and then we'll go through and mark things off. So, like I said, we are starting off on page 667, question number did I say 56 or? Oh, I think it's 50. I think we're starting with question number 55. I'm not sure actually. I'm just going to start with number 55. I don't think we did that one this last time. I should have. Okay, so last time was 44 to 54, so this time is 55 to 65. So, question number 55. Got that cleared up. Many house builders offer rent-to-buy programs that enable a family with insufficient savings for a conventional down payment to be able to move into new housing and to apply part of the rent to a purchase later. So, a large part of this sentence is underlined, and of course that makes it challenging. And there are, of course, sentences where the entire thing is underlined, making it even more challenging. On this one, though, the issues that jump out at me, we have, just kind of looking down the list, we have programs that enable, and sometimes they have an S, and that's the only thing that jumps out at me as, the transition from the not underlined portion to the underlined portion is the only part that jumps out at me for what we can predict will be the issues. There may be other things that turn up. Oh, and I guess the other thing actually is in the sentence as written, they have these programs that enable a family to be able to move. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. There's a lot of words in between the word enable and to be able, but really you don't have to enable someone to be able to do something. One or the other is sufficient, and usually you just enable to whatever the verb is, and you don't have the extra to be able in there. So there's a little bit of redundancy in here, so that makes choice A wordy. Yeah, so get rid of that one. We can also get rid of all the other answer choices that have this enable people to be able to do something. So let's see. Choice B has enable to move. Choice C has enables to move. Looks like choice E is the only other one that has enable to be able. I was going to write, well, I'll just write. I'll just mark it as wordy. So we were able to get rid of 2 answer choices on that basis. The other issue here is programs that enable versus programs that enables. Clearly, because programs is plural, we need enable singular. And in that case, that's choice D, where we see, the many house builders offer rent-to-buy programs, which enables a family. And we would need, so we have a subject-verb mismatch in D. Leaving us down between B and C. What's the difference? So many house builders offer rent-to-buy programs that enable a family, this is B, enable a family with insufficient savings for a conventional down payment to move into new housing and to apply. Okay. That sounds good. Choice C, offer rent-to-buy programs, semicolon. That enables a family with insufficient savings for a conventional down payment to move into new housing, comma, to apply part of the rent to a purchase later. So there's a couple things. So C has some extra punctuation. It has that semicolon after programs, and it also has a comma after move into new housing. That actually does change the meaning of the sentence. In the first case, having the semicolon after the word programs makes the word that refer to the house builders offering rent-to-buy programs, when in fact what we're trying to say is that the rent-to-buy programs themselves enable a family with insufficient savings to do X, Y, and Z. So by having semicolon, and then that says that everything that came before that previous clause is what enables families to do that, and that's not what we needed to do. Choice B is our correct answer. Also, the comma after housing, move into new housing, restates the ability to it says basically that moving into new housing is to apply part of the rent for the purchase later, and that's also not true. So choice B is our friend. Okay, so last one on this page, 667, number 56. Many of the earliest known images of Hindu deities in India date from the time of the Kushan Empire, fashioned either from the spotted sandstone of Mathura or Gandharan gray schist. Okay, so in the sentence as written, we have some modifying phrases. The main clause is the main sentence, the thing that we could not cut out and still have it make sense, is the first part where it says many of the earliest known images date from the time of the Kushan Empire. So that's the main sentence. The modifying phrase then is the fashioned either from the spotted sandstone of Mathura or Gandharan gray schist. Schist is a metamorphic rock, in case you were wondering. Since we have this modifying phrase that's underlined, the modifying phrase, remember, modifying phrases need to be as close as possible to the thing they're modifying for the sake of clarity. And we have this modifying phrase, fashioned either from the spotted sandstone, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is that's fashioned either from the spotted sandstone of Mathura or Gandharan gray schist, that needs to be as close as possible to whatever it is it needs to be as close as possible to the phrase. The Kushan Empire is not fashioned from spotted sandstone. So any answer choice that begins with the word empire cannot be right, because the empire is not what's fashioned from the stone. It is the earliest known images that were fashioned by the stone. Now, looking at down the answer choices, they all start with empire, so I need to refine my prediction. The problem is when it starts with empire, comma, fashioned. Because then the comma makes everything that comes after it a phrase modifying the thing that came before. So that allows us to eliminate answer choices A, B, and C. We're left between D and E. So we have the images date from the time of the Kushan Empire, and either fashioned from spotted sandstone of Mathura or from Gandharan gray schist. So in this one, let's just try and summarize the sentence, paraphrase it, cutting out some of the modifying phrases to see what's going on in choice D. So earliest known images date from the time of the empire and either fashioned from sandstone or from schist. The issue here is that then we have the images date and either fashioned from X or Y. The problem here is that date is a main verb. Fashioned in the active sense is possible, but then you fashion something. It's a transitive verb. It has a direct object. That's not the case. Here we are trying to say that these images were fashioned. They were made from these two types of rock, sandstone or schist. When you need the passive form of the verb, though, you actually need the form of the verb to be in there as the helping verb to show that it's the passive form. So the images date and either, were fashioned or are fashioned. We need this verb in here to show that it's the passive tense of the verb and to make it, or passive voice of the verb, and to make it parallel to date. So since choice D lacks that helping verb and choice E has it, also, there's the placement of the word either. Really, you should have either as close as possible to the first of the two choices. By having either before fashioned, it implies that they would either be fashioned or, found naturally or something like that. Whereas really, either should be before the first of the two materials, and then or should be before the second. So parallelism in choice D, and also the placement of the word either make it naughty. Choice E is our correct answer. And that's the end of our page on the page 668. I need to mark down, we need to go up to question 65. I don't want to accidentally feel like I have to go too far and rush too much. Okay, question number 57. That educators have not anticipated the impact of microcomputer technology can hardly be said that it is their fault. Alvin Toffler, one of the most prominent students of the future, did not even mention microcomputers in Future Shock, published in 1970. Okay, so we have a very complicated thing, a complicated independent clause set apart by a semicolon. So what does that mean? We have this, and then we have this. And this first portion is what's underlined. Remember that semicolons join two independent clauses, two things that could stand alone as sentences. And what that means for us on this one is that we can basically ignore everything that comes after the semicolon because it's not underlined, and reference, while you can have pronouns in the second part that refer back to the first part, we don't actually have that in that case. And so really, all that concerns us is the underlined portion. This could just as easily be a sentence that consists entirely of the part before the semicolon. How does that help us? Well, I mean, it's still tricky because we have this strange passive construction. What is the sentence trying to say? It's trying to say that it's not the fault of educators, or that educators are not at fault for not anticipating the impact of microcomputer technology. That's what we're trying to say. Grammatically, though, the sentence as written isn't doing that. It's saying that educators have not anticipated the impact of microcomputer technology can hardly be said that it is their fault. So it, the it in the that it is their fault doesn't have a clear referent, or it's an unnecessary reduplication. You can say, for example, in a simpler sentence, that he forgot to go to the store can hardly be said to be his fault. X can hardly be said to be somebody's fault. You don't need to repeat a subject like the word it in choice A. So it is a problem in A. You can start sentences this way, that basically you're saying the fact, and then you restate the fact that this didn't happen. it's a slightly backwards way of starting a sentence, and it looks like several of the answer choices C, D, and E, don't start with that phrase, but it's not necessarily grammatically correct as long as what follows still logically says that the failure to predict the impact of microcomputer technology is not their fault, as opposed to something else not being their fault or whatever. Anyway, choice B says that educators have not anticipated the impact of microcomputer technology can hardly be said to be at fault. So here, it's the fact that they didn't anticipate that's not at fault. We need the educators to not be at fault because, again, this sentence appears to be defending educators against the claim that it's their fault they didn't predict this. So many negatives in the sentence, it can be kind of challenging to talk about. Choice B has the fact that they didn't recognize this is at fault, and it's only people that can, or I suppose you could have machinery at fault for something, but we need the educators to be at fault, not the fact. I'll just call this a problem of fault. So now we have C, D, and E, which start with a different phrase, another passive construction. So here's a good example of, because the GMAT does prefer the active voice over the passive one. It's not the case that the passive voice is always wrong. Sometimes it's actually still going to be the clearest way to express a particular concept. We've already eliminated A and B, so clearly we are going to have a passive construction as the correct answer on the GMAT. So almost every style rule has some kind of exception on the GMAT, I think. So just know that when it comes to grammar, there are hard and fast rules. When it comes to style, there are more tendencies, because clarity is still the goal. Anyway, choice C, it can hardly be said that it is the fault of educators who have not anticipated the impact of microcomputer technology. So the normal idiom for something like this, we want to say it is the fault, and we need somebody's fault. And so we do have it is the fault of X that Y. That's the normal construction. It is the fault of X that Y happened. And choice C, we actually lack this second portion, the that Y. So choice C says it can hardly be said that it is the fault of educators. And then we explain more about what X is in this particular, using this construction. Educators who have not anticipated the impact of microcomputer technology. In this sentence, we never actually get the that Y portion that tells us what's their fault. So choice C actually changes the meaning. We need it to be not their fault that they didn't anticipate the impact of microcomputer technology. So D, it can hardly be said that educators are at fault for not anticipating the impact of microcomputer technology. Sorry, that's another version of the idiom. And so here it can hardly be said that educators said that X is at fault for Y. That's another way of expressing the same idea. Choice C still failed to do that one either. But the one that choice C was trying for is this one. So C is this, D is this one, X is at fault for Y. That one is done in the correct form. Can hardly be said that. So we have the thing that can't be said honestly or truthfully. And educators are at fault, and then, because remember that's what we were trying to go for all along, we needed to have the educators at fault, not some other fact, grammatically. And so D appears to be an option. Let's just see what E has for comparison. Maybe something will be obviously wrong with it. The fact that educators are not at fault for not anticipating, no wait, the fact that educators are at fault for not anticipating the impact of microcomputer technology can hardly be said. So this one it reverses the negatives. Instead of saying you can't say that they are at fault, it's saying you can hardly say that they are at fault for not anticipating. That's not wrong per se. The issue here, though, is that it's saying that you can hardly, this one establishes that it's a fact that they are at fault for not anticipating, and it just says you can hardly say that fact, which really completely changes the sentence. So we needed to be, by establishing it as the fact that initially in the sentence, makes it much trickier to justify claiming that that's what you can't say. What we want to say is that we can't say that they are at fault. I'm ready to be done talking about all the negatives in this sentence and moving on to something more straightforward. Choice D uses a correct idiom for somebody being at fault for something, as well as for negating the expression of that fault. Whereas choice E changes the meaning. Choice C messes up its construction, and then choices A and B also change the meaning or introduce other errors. Okay, let's go with something more straightforward. Page number 668 still. Question number 58. A leading figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Smith's two major books are To Democratic Capitalism, What Marx's Das Kapital Is to Socialism. So, this is a construction we've seen quite a few times so far on sentence correction. We have an opening modifying phrase, and then a noun. And remember that opening modifying phrase needs to modify the noun, and on the GMAT they will very often underline one or the other of these two parts and expect you to match them up correctly. So in this particular case, it's the noun phrase. Adam Smith's two major books are To Democratic blah blah blah. So whatever this noun is, the modifying phrase needs to be able to modify it. The opening phrase is a leading figure in the Scottish Enlightenment. So the noun right after the comma needs to be a leading figure. Books cannot be a leading figure. People are leading figures. So we need a person, and I'll just spoil it for you. It needs to be Adam Smith, because that's who the sentence is about. So the noun right after the comma needs to be Adam Smith. Now, Adam Smith does begin every single answer choice, but very often it's actually Adam Smith's two major books. We need it to not be his books, we need it to be the person. The other issue with this sentence is the construction, A is to B what C is to D. That's the structure they're trying to go for, that Adam Smith is his books, or he is to democratic capitalism what Marx's Das Kapital is to socialism. So this construction needs to be used correctly in the correct answer. So let's do the modifying phrase first, because I think that's going to be the easiest one. This is one of the easiest shortcuts on the GMAT in terms of, or the easiest things that once you're trained to look for it, it's much easier to root out those evil wrong answer choices. Modifying phrase followed by a noun. The modifying phrase needs to be able to modify the noun. So a leading figure, choice A has Adam Smith's two major books. That can't be right. Choice B has Adam Smith's two major books. Again, not right. C has Adam Smith's two major books. We've just eliminated 3 of the 5 answer choices. So we actually, if we knew nothing else about sentence correction, we have a 50% chance of guessing correctly on this one, which is pretty good odds if you have to take them. But luckily we don't have to. All right, so we have a choice between D and E. I'll just read them into the original sentence and see which one makes the most sense. A leading figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Smith wrote 2 major books that are to democratic capitalism similar to what Marx's Das Kapital is to socialism. So that actually doesn't sound like this construction that I'd written down here. A is to B what C is to D. Notice how it's parallel. I'll use a different color. Is to what the first one is to the second one, what the third one is to the fourth one. So there's parallelism there. In choice D, we have two major books that are to democratic capitalism similar to what Marx's Das Kapital is to socialism. What's this similar doing in there? Similar is a problem with choice D. Let's take a look at choice E then. A leading figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Smith wrote two major books that are to democratic capitalism what Marx's Das Kapital is to socialism. So there we have the parallel construction, A is to B, what C is to D. We have Adam Smith as the leading figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, and we don't have this nasty word similar. I'm just teasing about the word similar. It's not actually nasty. It just doesn't do us any good in this sentence. Choice E, though, has the correct construction and the correct modifying phrase. 668, number 59. The Olympic Games helped to keep peace among the pugnacious states of the Greek world in that a sacred truce was proclaimed during the festival's month. Okay, so we have basically kind of a an explanation of how the Olympic Games helped to keep the peace. There is this phrase, in that, which is kind of a more archaic or old-fashioned way of describing extent, which really means, you know, to the extent that. So you read it the same way as keep the peace to the extent that a sacred truce was proclaimed during the festival's month. It's not actually wrong, but it is this kind of very well, you know, the book actually characterizes it as overly formal. I mean, I think that I kind of wish they hadn't described it that way because, of course, they're trying to get you to write more formally and more clearly and concisely. It has elements of wordiness and, of course, as a slightly archaic expression, your reader may not entirely understand how you mean it. So choice A is an option, but we'd want to see something that improves on the way that it describes how the sacred truce brought or helped keep the peace. So choice B, we have the Olympic Games helped keep peace in the Greek world, proclaiming a sacred truce during the festival's month. It's not actually clear what proclaiming is modifying. Because remember, when we have comma and then an ing word, it can refer back to what came before, it can refer back to the subject, or it can refer back to the whole thing. Proclaiming, it could be the pugnacious states of the Greek world, it could be the Olympic Games, which makes it a little unusual because the games don't proclaim anything. So proclaiming doesn't do us any favors. Choice C actually introduces a similar problem. States of the Greek world, when they proclaimed a sacred truce for the festival month, who's they? They could be the games, they could be the states. I mean, contextually, even on this one, you know, it could be the organizers of the games that proclaim a truce, you know, and it would be up to the individual city-states to obey it, but either one could be the case. And ambiguity like that is not in favor at all on the GMAT. Choice D, peace among the pugnacious states of the Greek world, for a sacred truce was proclaimed during the month of the festival. This one bothers a lot of people, I'll just tell you, because it's a lesser used meaning of the word for, but for can mean because. So you can read choice D as because a sacred truce was proclaimed during the month of the festival. And that one, well, it's also problematic, but it uses fewer words than in that and is less archaic sounding. So D is an option. Choice E has helped keep peace among the states of the Greek world by proclamation of a sacred truce that was for the month of the festival. There's way too many words in there, way too many extra prepositions. Was for the month, proclamation of a sacred truce instead of just proclaiming a sacred truce, or, anyway. Choice E is clearly meant to be wordy and a little bit awkward. So now we have to choose between A and E. For, where for equals because, even if that's not a usage you're familiar with, it's more common than people using the phrase in that. It also uses fewer words, and as such, choice D is preferable to choice A. On to the second column on page 668. And that's question number 60. While all states face similar industrial waste problems, the predominating industries and the regulatory environment of the states obviously determines the types and amounts of waste produced, as well as the cost of disposal. That is a mess. Okay, so we have kind of two different clauses. We have, or two different sections. We have while all states face, and then we have industries and environment. And here already we've spotted one of the issues. We have a compound subject. The word and is the only word that can make a subject compound and plural if you didn't already have a plural noun as the subject. So even if this had just been industry and environment, those two singular words, when joined by the word and, make the subject plural. When you have a plural subject, you need a plural verb. In our sentence as written, we have determines. The industries and environment determines, which is naughty. It should be the industries and environment determine, a plural form of the verb. So any answer choice that has the word determines at the end of the underlined portion is not going to be correct because we've identified. So this paraphrasing of the sentence, figuring out what the main clause is, figuring out what the subject is, whenever you get these long convoluted sentences like this, it's well worth your time to actually take the time to figure out what's the subject, especially when the verb of the main clause is also in the underlined portion, as it is on this one. So determines is naughty. Just a quick vertical scan tells us that choices C and D both have the word determines, and we can just double check to make sure that they still have this plural subject. Choice C has predominating industries and regulatory environment. Okay, that has determines, and so C is wrong for determines. And then D, predominant industries and regulatory environment determines again. So that one subject-verb mismatch enabled us to eliminate 3 answer choices, which is always awesome. You know, when you get a 3-2 split and you are able to knock out the 3, you're in good shape. Now we just have to decide between B and E. And that's interesting. Already at the very beginning we have a difference. Choice B has each state faces a similar industrial waste problem, and whereas choice E has all states face similar industrial waste problems. So which is better, each or all? Well, in this particular case, you know, sense suggests that we are trying to say that while the waste problems are similar as a group, they're homogeneous, the types and amounts of waste produced are what's different depending on the industries and environments in and regulatory environments in each state. So we're trying to say that the problems are the same, but the I guess we would call it the implementation are different. You know, if we're going to use the problems all being the same, the word all makes more sense. It's not grammatically incorrect to say that each state faces a similar industrial waste problem. So let's just actually keep going in the sentence, because it would be nice if we could have a further error, because each versus all so far is really a pretty fine point for distinguishing between two answer choices, especially since they each would be true. So choice B has each state faces a similar industrial waste problem. Their predominant industries and regulatory environment obviously determine. So it does have the correct plural subject, but there's that word there, T-H-E-I-R, in there, T-H-E-R-E. Each state faces a similar problem. Their predominant industries. We go from each, which is singular, to their in choice B. And that's naughty. When you have pronouns, they need to refer correctly in number back to their reference. And so if we're talking about each individual state, we would need a singular pronoun, not the plural one. Choice B has a clear error in it, in addition to the slightly less preferable each as opposed to all in terms of context. Let's read E just to make sure that we didn't miss any obvious errors. All states face similar industrial waste problems. The predominant industries and the regulatory environment of each state obviously determine. Okay, so that sounds right according to everything we've decided, and in fact it is the correct answer. On to number 61. Let's see, 61. Rivaling the pyramids of Egypt or even the ancient cities of the Maya as an achievement, the army of terracotta warriors created to protect Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, in his afterlife is more than 2,000 years old and took 700,000 artisans more than 36 years to complete. That is a lot of modifying phrases. But once again, we have our familiar situation of an opening modifying phrase and then a comma and then a noun. In this particular case, it's from this point onward that's underlined. So the opening modifying phrase needs to modify the noun that it's right next to. So whatever it is that follows the comma needs to rival the pyramids of Egypt or even the ancient cities of the Maya as an achievement. Choice A has the army of terracotta warriors. That sounds like an achievement. It's something that's built. So that's an option. Choice B has the China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And so we can't have the person. We need a building, an achievement, something something that humans built, not an actual emperor. Choice C, it took 700,000 artisans more than 36 years. All those numbers. There we don't even have a noun following the comma. Again, that modifying phrase needs to be close to the thing that it's modifying, and it isn't going to do it in choice C. Choice D is even worse. There isn't even a pronoun after the comma. More than 2,000 years ago, 700,000 artisans worked more than 36 years, and oh my goodness, we still haven't found what is supposed to rival the pyramids of Egypt. So choice D is terrible. Choice E, more than 36 years were needed to complete the army of terracotta warriors that 700,000 artisans created 2,000 years ago. Again, that one doesn't even give us grammatically doesn't give us a noun standing out to be modified by that opening modifying phrase. So only choice A gives us a noun right after the comma that can rival the pyramids of Egypt or even the ancient cities of the Maya as an achievement. Every once in a while, you will actually be able to eliminate 4 answer choices based on your initial determination. This whole opening modifying phrase thing with the noun right after it, identifying that is a huge time saver on the GMAT. Okay, we can move on to the next page, page 669, question number 62. When Congress reconvenes, some newly elected members from rural states will try and establish tighter restrictions for the amount of grain farmers are to be allowed to grow and to encourage more aggressive sales of United States farm products overseas. Okay, so clearly the one jumps out at me anyway. Try and verb. People say this all the time in spoken English, but it's not actually something you should be doing in formal writing. You can try to verb, but try and I mean, I think I even say this in everyday spoken English occasionally, but I don't say it in formal writing, and that's what the GMAT is trying to correct. So you try to, you don't try and. And in this particular sentence, they are trying to do two things. They are going to try to establish, and they're also trying to encourage. Those two things need to be parallel because they're both kind of dependent on the verb try. So we need to try to establish and try to encourage. And then there's also this, so number one is getting rid of try and. Number two is having parallelism in the things being tried. Number three, we have, again, this is just from the sentence as written, we have restrictions for the amount. Normally, you have restrictions on the amount. So there's another idiom thing there that we can just spot. So choice A has 1, 2. Well, actually, it doesn't have number 2 wrong with it. It does have those parallel. It has number 1 and 3 wrong with it. Either one on alone would have been enough to eliminate it, but anyway, choice A, not it. Choice B still has the try and establish, and it does have restrictions on, which is good. So we have try and, oh, actually, no, it does have a problem with try to establish because it says try and establish rather than try to establish. Choice B has a problem with number 2 by not having two parallel things that you're trying because it has try and establish and encouraging, but it does at least have restrictions on. So B has numbers 1 and 2 wrong. Choice C will try establishing tighter restrictions for the amount of grain farmers are allowed to grow and to encourage. So choice C doesn't have parallelism. That's what number 2 is. And it also has restrictions for rather than restrictions on. Choice D, try to establish tighter regulations on the amount of grain capable of being grown by farmers and encouraging. So it does have try to establish, which we wanted it to have, but then it has encouraging rather than to encourage, so it's not parallel. It's got problems with number 2. And it's also really kind of wordy. Restrictions on the amount of grain capable of being grown. It's not actually growing their growing capacity, but the amount that they're actually, whatever they're legally allowed to grow. So it's just plain wordy. Oops, my pen disappeared. Come back, pen, please. Okay. Which leaves us only with choice E, so let's hope it actually corrects the things we were hoping it corrects. We'll try to establish tighter restrictions on the amount of grain farmers will be allowed to grow and to encourage. So it has parallelism to establish and to encourage. It has the correct idiom, restrictions on the amount, and then it also has it has try to rather than try and. So choice E is our correct answer. We're not actually going to get past page 669 today, but we are going to get past that previous question. We're now on number 63. The yield of natural gas from Norway's Troll gas field is expected to increase annually until the year 2005, and then to stabilize at 6 billion cubic feet a day. which will allow such an extraction rate for at least 50 years production. Okay. So one of the things that jumps out at me here is this comma which. In the sentence as written, it says it'll stabilize at 6 billion cubic feet a day, which will allow such an extraction rate for 50 years. 6 billion cubic feet a day is an extraction rate. That extraction rate will allow such an extraction rate. So choice A has the rate, allows the rate, which doesn't make sense. What we need is the increase to, or that we want the rate to basically allow the 50 years production, rather than the rate allowing an extraction rate for 50 years production. Okay, so yes, this one's definitely tricky. Let's take a look at B. Expected to increase annually until the year 2005, and then to stabilize at 6 billion cubic feet a day, an extraction rate that will allow at least 50 years production. So here we have basically a kind of apposition. We are saying 6 billion cubic feet a day, and then renaming that as an extraction rate that allows or that will allow at least 50 years production. That sounds much better. It's not the rate allowing a rate, it's the rate, and then we restate what that rate means, the significance of that rate. So B is an option. Choice C, until the year 2005, and then stabilizing at 6 billion cubic feet a day with such an extraction rate at the least allowing 50 years production. Definitely wordy. And then also, we have kind of a parallel construction here, or we're supposed to. We have that the yield, that's the subject of the sentence, the yield is, this is in the not underlined portion, the yield is expected to increase, and then the yield is expected to stabilize. So we need a parallel construction there. Choice C says we have, of course, to increase in the not underlined portion, so that's always going to be constant, but we need a to stabilize in our answer choice for parallelism. Choice C has stabilizing rather than to stabilize, and so it's not parallel. Choice D also has stabilizing rather than to stabilize, so it's not parallel. And actually choice E also has stabilizing rather than to stabilize. So all three of those do not have the parallelism that we needed. Choice B is the only one that has to stabilize and then renames the significance of that extraction rate. So we are on the second to last question, page 669, number 64. Doctors generally agree that such factors as cigarette smoking, eating rich foods high in fats, and alcohol consumption not only do damage by themselves, but also aggravate genetic predisposition. Oh my goodness. It's been a long morning apparently. Not only do damage by themselves, but also aggravate genetic predispositions towards certain diseases. So, we have a couple things. We have one of these not only but also constructions. On the GMAT, you can expect if you have but also, you will also have not only. If you have not only, you will also have but also. They are inseparable on the GMAT. So that's number one that we need to look for in our correct answers. Actually, that's the only thing that jumps out at me as something that I can predict before looking at the answer choices. Does choice A have that? Not only do damage by themselves, but also aggravate. So it looks like there might also be a parallelism thing. Whatever comes after not only needs to be paralleled by but also. So we have do damage, not only do damage, but also aggravate. So these two are parallel. Do damage and aggravate are both present tense verbs. So choice A is an option. Let's see if something improves on that. So these things do damage by themselves, but also are aggravating too. Well, this one lacks the not only, so that's enough to make it wrong. But also, to be aggravating has a slightly more specific meaning than to aggravate. So to aggravate means to make worse, and it can also mean to annoy. But to be aggravating basically only means to be annoying. And we're not talking about how I guess cigarette smoking is kind of annoying if you're not a smoker and somebody else wants to smoke near you and you don't like it because it smells bad. So yes, that's annoying, but we're talking about how these factors can make worse genetic predispositions towards certain diseases. So we don't want to use the phrase, any form of the phrase be aggravating, because while those things may be annoying, we are talking about how they make certain diseases worse or more likely. So this also has be aggravating, which is wrong. Choice C, these things are damaging by themselves but also are aggravating. Again, we have are aggravating. And we also lack the not only. So actually both C and B and C lack both these things. D has not only do damage by themselves, they are also aggravating. So again, with the aggravating, I'm beginning to get aggravated by the aggravating. But this one, so it has not only, but it lacks but also, which is, again, enough to make it not right. Choice E, are doing damage by themselves, and they are also aggravating. So here we do have parallelism without not only but also. We can say that something does this and also does that, but we have these present progressive tenses, are doing damage and are aggravating. When you want to express generally true conditions, when it rains it pours, or when I get caught without my umbrella I get wet, something that generally happens, a general condition of truth, those are expressed with the simple present tense, not with a present progressive tense. Because the choice E says that this is what's going on right now. That's what makes the present progressive tense present progressive. It is something that is in progress, whereas choice A is more a statement that's generally true. It was true before and was going on before, it's going on now, and will continue to be true until somebody does something about it. So the present progressive is what dooms choice E. We just need the simple present to describe this general problem of smoking, eating rich foods high in fats, and alcohol consumption aggravating genetic predispositions. Simple present. Choice A. Okay, last question, number 65 on page 669. In a plan to stop the erosion of East Coast beaches, the Army Corps of Engineers proposed building parallel to shore a breakwater of rocks that would rise 6 feet above the waterline and act as a buffer so that it absorbs the energy of crashing waves and protecting the beaches. Okay. Long sentence, and actually a kind of a sophisticated sentence. Notice, there's that little phrase, proposed building parallel to shore a breakwater of rocks. A breakwater is actually the object of building a breakwater of rocks, and they put parallel to shore between between building and then what's actually being built. So that's a little bit sophisticated. It's not naughty, and it may have made more sense to put parallel to shore there. As opposed to somewhere else. So anyway, but that's not in the underlined portion, so we don't really have to worry about it. What we do have is we have a breakwater of rocks that would rise up 6 feet above the water line and act as a buffer. So it's going to rise and act. So that sounds parallel. And so that it absorbs and protecting. So here we have parallelism. So that it absorbs and protecting we don't, and the protecting is not in the underlined portion of the sentence. So basically we're going to need something like absorbing instead of so that it absorbs to have parallelism. So choice A lacks parallelism. So choice B has act like a buffer so as to absorb. So we don't have parallelism. And also like, acting like a buffer but not acting as a buffer is a little bit different because it means that you're not really fully doing what a buffer would do. It means it's similar in some ways. So, like, it has that effect that if you want to describe something being exactly the same as something else, you use as. Acting as this, you fully fulfill the role. If you're acting like it, if somebody looks like a movie star, they have similarities there, but they maybe aren't necessarily a movie star, and they wouldn't fulfill every definition of that meaning. So like is less good, but the parallelism, of course, totally dooms choice B. Choice C, act as a buffer. Absorbing, so there we have our parallelism that we were after, and we still have rise and act. So choice C looks pretty good. Choice D has acting as a buffer, absorbing the energy of crashing waves and protecting the beaches. Act actually needs to be parallel to rise because it's going to rise 6 feet above the water line and act as a buffer. If we had had the comma before that, where it would have, rise 6 feet above the water line, comma, acting as a buffer, absorbing the energy of crashing waves, and protecting the beaches, choice D could have been right, but there's no comma there. We're not starting a list of ing things that the buffer is doing until after we establish that it's a buffer. So choice D lacks parallelism, it's not D. And then choice E has like in it. It's also not parallel because it is acting rather than act. And it also has absorb rather than absorbing. So it's kind of doubly not parallel, and that double not parallelism does not go back to making it parallel again. Choice E, not it. Choice C, parallel in our two sections there. And yeah, choice C is the correct one for number 65. That's going to be a great place to stop. And so yeah, thanks for joining me today. My name's Jim Jacobson. We are going to pick up next time, where next time is tomorrow if you're watching this live, with number 66 and go up through number 76 on the next pair of pages. You've been watching Grockit's OGTV program on Grockit.com, where we're going through the 12th edition to the guide, the one with the purple cover. Don't study too hard in the meantime, and I hope to see you next time.